All right, let's continue our focus on the issue of the Firearms Control Amendment Bill that has got everyone talking about the right or, privilege of owning a firearm and the implications for private defense, which will include self-defense. How are we able to do that? Also, weighing into that equation the whole issue around the levels of violence and specifically gun violence in our society. Well, Deepak Panday was entrenched deeply in the underworld of gangsterism in Durban's Phoenix township. A near-death experience saw him being shot in the face by a rival gang. This convinced him to break away from a life of crime. He's now authored a book called The Kings of Durban. To share his experiences, I'm joined now by Panday to delve further into the gun ownership debate and gang violence. Thank you for joining me, Deepak. Talk to me about what your thinking is, your broad thinking around this idea that we have the civilian secretariat of the SAPS calling for South Africans to comment about a bill whose many proposals, some of which include the possibility that licensing for ownership of a firearm for self-defense may be a thing of the past if this bill is adopted and passed. What's your initial thinking? Good idea, bad idea?
Thanks for having me over once again to the ENT News team and to all our viewers. This is one of the topics I think is at the top of the agenda right now in SA, and it's a controversial one because our country has such a high violence, gun violence related issues in terms of people, getting shot up, hijackings, most of the things I think we've already basically covered previously. However, the whole point is you cannot go out there and disarm the citizens, because how do we protect ourselves? We've got our own families, we've got our businesses, and we are targets. We are easy targets for the criminals because, as you mentioned earlier, these guys are coming with high caliber firearms, and we are basically armed with the revolvers and the 9mm pistols. And the major question I like to ask around this issue is, how are these guns being accessed by these criminals? How are criminals getting these AK-47s, which are not even manufactured here in the country? They're coming from overseas. How is this sort of thing happening? And how is the underworld and the gangland basically involved and related into this issue,
Do you have any insights into that, Deepak, in terms of the questions you asked?
Well,
how exactly? It's a great question. I mean, AK-47s, we associate them with war zones, guerrilla warfare, etc. But it seems there's no slowing down in the proliferation of those high-end automatic rifles and high-caliber weapons.
Yeah, I think the government and the minister should be actually looking more into that direction rather than coming after the civilians who are basically going out there, obtaining a license, paying for it, renewing the license when it needs to be renewed, and also basically the safekeeping of a firearm, And whereas you see blazing robbers and thieves and criminals go out and shoot in broad daylight. But coming back to the Kings of Durban, coming back to research and I think it was in the 90s, I watched this lovely documentary by the late Stuckey brothers, and Rashid Stuckey mentioned there that the cops actually come in every fortnight and sell the firearms that they find and the firearms that they confiscate. They actually sell it back into the community, back to gangsters. So, how do you justify that and then coming after us, So I think maybe what should actually be going down is cleaning up houses. Maybe we should look at going out to individual SAPS and eliminating the corruption and the level of corruption that's actually happening there. Whereas you see we now as the citizens becoming targets. And believe me, it's a very volatile situation because people are afraid. If you look at the business people out there, we've got numerous multi-million-dollar businesses running. And these guys are targets. They're also targets for kidnapping. As we see a lot of Pakistani internationals, you see a lot of African nationals coming into the country and actually running rings for kidnapping and stuff, just for making them a few easy bucks. But once again, we need to protect ourselves. We need to protect our families. And we need to protect our businesses because, if you really look at the large picture, the STPS and the government is not really doing much. That is why South Africa has such a huge market, shall I say, for private security companies. That is why private security companies are thriving, is because the government and the SAPS are failing us. So I think coming back to, yes, sir.
Sorry, just before I run out of time, please set me straight if my impression is wrong here, that in terms of the tools of the trade, as Adele Kirsten from Gun Free South Africa described them for criminals, for me, my impression is that in a lot of the robberies, it's the high-end automatic weapons that are used, you know, your rifles, etc. But I may be wrong there. Perhaps there's a certain category of violent crime that involves the high-end, high-caliber weapons, but actually there's another market, and you can set me straight from your experience, that actually it's not untrue that the weapons that people have, the smaller weapons that people have that are licensed in their homes, are taken for other categories of crime. For instance, gang warfare, in some instances, the small-time gangsters pushing drugs on the streets, etc., when they have disputes, sometimes it's not really the high-end, high-caliber weapons. So there's a case to be made there that, you know, if you dry up the pool of supply, it could have an impact.
Very, very good point there. You know, the high-end firearms actually came in to scare police, because now, in the event of any interaction going on, conflict going on between gangsterism or robbers and thieves, and you got the police, the police does not have that sort of armory to actually to fight back, you know, because these guys are more heavily armed than the cops. They've got more arms and they're more high-caliber arms than the police officers. Coming back to the gangsterism and mentioning, yeah, the 9mm and revolvers do play some sort of role. However, the restrictions need to come back into play, you know, before you actually go out and issue a license. I'm saying before you take away this whole citizens of owning firearms due to their personal protection, I think you should actually go back to look at how you actually issuing these licensings to the specific people, you know, and actually coming back to say, okay, these are sort of restrictions put in place. Because I feel that the firearm law and the firearm act is going more towards the sides of the criminals rather than the people. Because, as I said, it's more easier to access a firearm off the black market than to actually to buy a legit and a legal firearm. So I think we're really in a very volatile situation, and I also think we need to consider these points before going forward and putting any amendments being made to the act, you know.
All right, thank you so much for your insights there. That is Deepak Panday, who was just sharing some of his insights on this particular conversation around the control of firearms. In fact, we'll continue with that in-depth conversation in the next few minutes. Stay with us.